Hello, contemporary issue students. We're going to read from the same-sex. Should same-sex marriage be a constitutional right? Issue 15 from the Taking Sides book. We're reading The No Side, Gay Marriage and Marriage by Sam Schulman. The reading begins on page 260, but checking back on page 391 of your text, you will see that Sam Schulman is a New York writer whose work appears in the New York Press, The Spectator, which is a London publication, and JewishWorldReview.com. So let us begin. Tampering with the unwritten and unfailing laws. The feeling seems to be growing that gay marriage is inevitably coming our way in the U.S., perhaps through a combination of judicial fiat and legislation in individual states. Growing, too, is the sense of a shift in the climate of opinion. The American public seems to be in the process of changing its mind, not actually in favor of gay marriage, but toward a position of slightly revolted tolerance for the idea. Survey results suggest that people have forgotten why they were so opposed to the notion even as recently as a few years ago. It is curious that this has happened so quickly. With honorable exceptions, most of those who are passionately on the side of the traditional understanding of marriage appear to be at a loss for words to justify their passion. As for the rest, many seem to wish gay marriage had never been proposed in the first place, but also to have resigned themselves to whatever happens. In this respect, the gay marriage debate is very different from the abortion debate, in which few with an opinion on either side have been so disengaged. I think I understand why this is the case. As someone passionately and instinctively opposed to the idea of homosexual marriage, I have found myself disappointed by the arguments I have seen advanced against it. The strongest of these arguments predict measurable harm to the family and to our arrangements for the upbringing and well-being of children. I do not doubt that the accuracy of these arguments, but they do not seem to get at the heart of the matter. To me, what is at stake in this debate is not only the potential unhappiness of children, grave as that is, it is our ability to maintain the most basic components of our humanity. I believe, in fact, that we are at an Antigone moment. Some of our fellow citizens wish to impose a radically new understanding upon laws and institutions that are both very old and fundamental to our organizations as individuals and as a society. As Antigone said to Creon, we are being asked to tamper with unwritten and unfailing laws, not of now, not of yesterday. They always live, and no one knows their origin in time. I suspect, moreover, that everyone knows this is the case, and that, paradoxically, this very awareness of just how much is at stake is what may have induced in defenders of those same written and unfailing laws a kind of paralysis. Admittedly, it is very difficult to defend that which is both ancient and unwritten. The arguments do not resolve themselves into a neat parade of documentary evidence, research results, or citations from legal literature. Admittedly, too, proponents of this radically new understanding have been uncommonly effective in presenting their program as something that is not radical at all, but as requiring merely a slight and painless adjustment in our customary arrangements. Finally, we have all learned to practice a certain deference to the pleas of minorities with a grievance, and in recent years no group has benefited more from this society-wide dispensation than homosexuals. Nevertheless, in the somewhat fragmentary notes that follow, I hope to articulate what I am persuaded everyone knows to be the case about marriage, and perhaps thereby encourage others with stronger arguments than mine to help break the general paralysis. Let us begin by admiring the case for gay marriage. Unlike the case for completely unrestricted abortion, which has come to be something of an embarrassment even to those who advance it, the case for gay marriage enjoys the decided advantage of appealing to our better moral natures as well as to our reason. It deploys two arguments. The first centers on the principles of justice and fairness and may be thought of as the civil rights argument. The second is at once more personal and more utilitarian, emphasizing the degradation and unhappiness attendant upon the denial of gay marriage, and conversely, the human and social happiness that will flow from its legal establishment. Both arguments have been set forth most persuasively by two gifted writers, Bruce Bower and Andrew Sullivan, each of whom describes himself as a social conservative. In their separate ways, they have been campaigning for gay marriage for over a decade. Bower's take on the subject is succinctly summarized in his 1993 book, A Place at the Table. Sullivan has held forth on the desirability of legalizing gay marriage in numerous articles on his website, andrewsullivan.com, and in an influential book, Virtually Normal, 1995. The civil rights argument goes like this. Marriage is a legal state conferring real tangible benefits on those who participate in it, specifically tax breaks as well as other advantages when it comes to inheritance, property ownership, and employment benefits. But family law, since it limits marriage to heterosexual couples over the age of consent, clearly discriminates against a segment of the population. It is thus a matter of simple justice that, in Sullivan's words, all public, as opposed to private, discrimination against homosexuals be ended, and that every right and responsibility the heterosexuals enjoy as public citizens be extended to those who grow up and find themselves emotionally different. Not to grant such rights, Sullivan maintains, is to impose on homosexuals a civil deprivation akin to that suffered by black Americans under Jim Crow. The utilitarian argument is more subtle, just as the rights argument seems to be aimed mainly at liberals. This one seems mostly to have in mind the concerns of conservatives. In light of the disruptive, anarchic, violence-prone behavior of many homosexuals, the argument runs, why should we not encourage the formation of stable, long-term, monogamous relationships that will redound to the health of society as a whole? Bower, for his part, has come close to saying that the inability of many male homosexuals to remain faithful in long-term relationships is a consequence of the lack of marriage rights, a burning sign of the more general stigma under which gays labor in our society, and which can be redressed by changes in the law. The case is elegant and it is compelling, but it is not unanswerable, and answers have indeed been forthcoming, even if, as I indicated at the outset, many of them have tended to be couched somewhat defensively. Thus, rather than repudiating the very idea of an abstract right to marry, many upholders of the traditional definition of marriage tacitly concede such a right, only going on to suggest that denying it to a minority amounts to a lesser hurt than conferring it would impose on the majority, and especially on children, the weakest members of our society. Others, to be sure, have attacked the Bower-Sullivan line more forthrightly. In a September 2000 article and commentary, What is Wrong with Gay Marriage?, Stanley Kurtz challenged the central contention that marriage would do for gay men what it does for straights. For example, domesticate their natural male impulse to promiscuity. Citing a number of academic queer theorists and radical gays, Kurtz wrote, in contrast to moderates and conservatives like Andrew Sullivan, who consistently play down the difference between gays and straights in order to promote their vision of gays as monogamists in the making, radical gays have argued more knowledgeably, more powerfully, and more vocally than any opponent of same-sex marriage would dare to do that homosexuality, and particularly male homosexuality, is by its very nature incompatible with the norms of traditional monogamous marriage. True, Kurtz went on, such radical gays nevertheless support same-sex marriage, but what motivates them is the hope of eventually undoing the institution of marriage altogether by delegitimizing age-old understandings of the family and thus, in the words of one such radical, striking at the heart of organization of Western culture and societies. James Q. Wilson, Maggie Gallagher, Stanley Kurtz, and others, including William J. Bennett in The Broken Hearth 2001, are right to point to the deleterious private and public consequences of instituting gay marriage. Why then do their arguments fail to satisfy completely? Partly, no doubt, it is because the damage they describe is largely perspective and to that degree hypothetical. Partly, as I remarked early on, the defensive tone that invariably enters into these polemics may rob them of the force they would otherwise have. I hardly mean to deprecate that tone. Anyone with homosexual friends or relatives, especially those participating in long-standing romantic relationships, must feel abashed to find himself saying, in effect, "You gentlemen, you ladies are one and the same, a fine example of fidelity and mutual attachment, and the thin edge of the wedge." Nevertheless, in demanding the right to marry, that is exactly what they are. To grasp what is at the other side of the wedge, that is, what stands to be undone by gay marriage, we have to distinguish marriage itself from a variety of other goods and values with which it is regularly associated by its defenders and its aspirants alike. Those values, love and monogamous sex, and establishing a home, fidelity, childbearing and child-rearing, stability, inheritance, tax breaks, and all the rest, are not the same as marriage. True, a good marriage generally contains them. A bad marriage is generally deficient in them, and in law, religion, and custom. Even under the strictest of moral regimes, their absence can be grounds for ending the union. But the essence of marriage resides elsewhere, and those who seek to arrange a kind of marriage for the inherently unmarriageable are looking for those things in the wrong places. The largest fallacy of all arises from the emphasis on romantic love. In a book published last year, Tipper and Al Gore defined a family as those who are joined at the heart, getting beyond words, legal formalities, and even blood ties. The distinction the Gores draw in this sentimental and offhand way is crucial, but they utterly misconstrue it. Hearts can indeed love and stop loving, but what exactly does this have to do with marriage, which can follow, proceed, or remain wholly independent of that condition? It is a truism that many married people feel little sexual or romantic attraction to each other, perhaps because they have been married too long, or perhaps, as some men have always claimed, because the death of sexual desire is coincident with the wedding ceremony. All comedies are ended by a marriage, Byron wittily and sadly remarked. Many people in ages past, certainly most people, have married for reasons other than sexual or romantic attraction. So what? I could marry a woman I did not love, a woman I did not feel sexually attracted to or want to sleep with, and our marriage would still be a marriage, not just legally, but in its essence. The truth is banal, circular, but finally unavoidable. By definition, the essence of marriage is to sanction and solemnize the connection of opposites, which alone creates new life. Whether or not a given married couple does in fact create new life is immaterial. Men and women can marry only because they belong to a different opposite sex. In marriage, they surrender those separate and different sexual allegiances, coming together to form a new entity. Their union is not a formalizing of romantic love, but represents a certain idea, a construction, an abstract thought about how best to formalize the human condition. Oh, I lost my place. This thought embodied in a promise or a contract is what holds marriage together, and the creation of this idea of marriage marks a key moment in the history of human development, a triumph over the alternative idea, which is concubinage. And we'll pick up on the next slide.